They let a 20-foot helium-filled homemade flying saucer loose, with their son reportedly in it, and had the whole city of Colorado panicking and chasing after it for hours, only for authorities to discover that there was no boy in the balloon. This is the story of the Balloon Boy Hoax. The Heene family, Father Richard, Mother Mayumi, and their 3 sons were no strangers to the spotlight. Living in Fort Collins, Colorado, they had already made a name for themselves through reality TV appearances and Richard's wild attention-seeking stunts. An aspiring scientist and self-proclaimed storm chaser, Richard was convinced that his eccentric inventions and unconventional lifestyle would one day make his family famous. They had previously appeared on a reality TV show called Wife Swap, which showcased families living in unconventional ways. By all accounts, the Heenes appeared like an ordinary family to their neighbors, but behind closed doors, their life was anything but. Richard had dreams of becoming a reality TV star, and those aspirations would eventually drive him to orchestrate one of the most notorious hoaxes in modern history. Around noon on October 15, 2009, Richard Heene called emergency services, claiming that his youngest son, Falcon, had climbed into a homemade helium balloon, which was tethered to the ground in their backyard. The balloon, measuring around 20 feet in diameter, was a large silver saucer-like structure designed by Richard himself. Heene reported that the balloon had taken off without warning, with his son trapped inside, helpless as it soared into the sky. The local authorities quickly sprang into action, launching a massive rescue operation. Helicopters followed the balloon as it floated for hours over the plains of Colorado. All planes in the area were rerouted, and news crews from across the country descended on the Heene household. As the balloon drifted across the sky, millions of viewers watched the unfolding drama on live television, fearing for the young boy's safety. Richard and Mayumi Heene were in tears, distraught, pleading for Falcon's safe return and expressing their horror at what seemed like an accidental event. The media bought into it, with headlines across the country reporting the tragedy unfolding before their eyes. Richard Heene, in particular, was the center of attention, speaking tearfully to the press, describing his desperation to save his son. However, as the day went on, cracks in the story started to show. The balloon floated too smoothly, far more steadily than one carrying a child's weight should. Then, there were inconsistencies in Richard's description of its flight path, and to make matters worse, experts pointed out a flaw. The balloon had no straps, no seat, no safety features, nothing to actually hold a child inside. Yet despite the doubts, the Heenes were still given the benefit of the doubt by the public, by the media, even by the authorities. No one wanted to believe the worst. The only thing that mattered was bringing the balloon down safely and rescuing Falcon. For 2 tense hours, the country watched as the silver craft drifted through the sky, slowing as it lost altitude. Then, just outside Denver International Airport, it finally touched down. Police and rescue teams rushed in, deflating the balloon, tearing it apart, searching for Falcon. But Falcon wasn't there. The balloon was completely empty. Panic set in. Had Falcon fallen out mid-flight? A full-scale search began, covering every field, rooftop, and stretch of land along the balloon's flight path, but no trace of him was found. Now, the focus shifted, no longer on the balloon, but on the Heene family. How sure were they that Falcon was ever inside? Richard and Mayumi insisted he was. Their oldest son Brad backed them up. But as the hours ticked by, the doubts only grew stronger. As the media frenzy escalated, Richard Heene refused to waver. He doubled down on his story, standing in front of cameras, voice shaking, insisting that Falcon must have fallen from the balloon, lost somewhere in the vast Colorado wilderness. He spoke about his fear, his desperation, how every passing minute made his son's survival less likely. But the longer Falcon remained missing, the more law enforcement began to question the entire story. No one had actually seen Falcon climb into the balloon. There was no physical evidence that he had ever been inside, yet Richard's unwavering insistence only fueled public speculation, turning a tragedy into a national obsession. Then, after hours of search efforts, helicopters in the air, flights diverted, roads blocked, a small figure appeared at the Heene residence. It was Falcon. Bubbly, full of energy, perfectly fine. Relief quickly turned to confusion, because Falcon hadn't been floating in the sky. He hadn't fallen out. He had never even left home. The 6-year-old had been hiding the entire time in a cardboard box in the attic of the family garage while an entire city scrambled to save him. As investigators began to probe deeper into the Heenes' story, things started to unravel. The Heenes staunchly stuck to their version of events, but more and more odd details emerged. One of the most significant clues came when Falcon, during a live interview shortly after he was discovered, blurted out, "You guys said we did this for the show," when Richard asked why he didn't answer when they called out for him.
You guys said that we did this for the show.
His innocent remark sent shockwaves through the public and cast doubt on the entire narrative. The Heenes tried to explain away Falcon's statement, claiming it was a misunderstanding, but by now, the public was full-on skeptical. Law enforcement's suspicions were piqued, and they began examining Heene's background more closely. It wasn't long before they uncovered a series of inconsistencies, including Richard Heene's previous attempts to gain fame through his invention and reality TV aspirations. It became clear that Richard Heene had orchestrated the entire hoax to gain media attention. The Heenes had been trying to break into the world of reality television for some time, and Richard had even pitched a show about his family's unusual lifestyle to TV networks. By creating a media spectacle around the rescue of his son, Heene hoped to land a TV deal that would catapult his family to stardom. This was not just a random accident. It was a calculated attempt to manipulate the public, the media, and law enforcement to achieve the Heenes' dreams of fame. And despite the growing suspicion around the case, Richard Heene kept up the facade, convinced that the hoax would lead to the attention and opportunity he craved. The moment Falcon innocently slipped up during the interview on CNN's Larry King Live show, the jig was up. Investigators and journalists who had spent hours chasing a false narrative now knew for certain that the entire incident had been staged. The authorities quickly moved in, and Richard and Mayumi Heene were questioned, and they eventually admitted to orchestrating the entire event. The consequences for the Heenes were severe. Richard Heene was charged with felony counts of conspiracy, making a false report to authorities, and attempting to influence a public servant. In November 2009, Richard Heene was sentenced to 90 days in jail, 4 years of probation, and 120 hours of community service. Mayumi Heene avoided jail time, but was given probation and community service. The incident also led to a significant loss of public trust. The Heenes were widely reviled for wasting valuable law enforcement resources and for manipulating the public's emotions. The public reaction was swift and unforgiving. People were outraged by the Heenes' actions, feeling that they had been duped by a family seeking fame at any cost. There was a great deal of anger over how much time and energy had been wasted, especially considering the resources that had been channeled into the rescue operation. While some felt pity for the children caught up in the hoax, the overwhelming sentiment was one of disbelief and disgust at the parents' manipulation. In the years since the Balloon Boy hoax, the Heenes have largely faded from the public eye. Richard and Mayumi Heene both struggled to rebuild their lives after the scandal. Richard attempted a few businesses, but has never gained the level of fame he hoped to achieve. Interestingly, Richard Heene still insists Falcon's disappearance was not a hoax, and that he was forced to admit it under duress because his wife was threatened with deportation. Falcon, on the other hand, is now a teenager and has spoken out about the hoax, admitting that he was deeply affected by the incident. He has since tried to move on with his life, though the shadow of the hoax continues to follow him. He now stars in a boy band with his brothers, and they've even made a song about the balloon saga. The Heenes may have gained their 15 minutes of fame, but it came at the expense of their credibility and their son's innocence.